And good morning. Today we're going to, I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with the NDIA compensation team. Over the last 12 months, I've come across a few incidences where people who sued over personal injury are getting compensation through personal injury were losing a lot of their money for supports. And there was a lot of confusion on why this was happening. So I reached out to the NDIA compensation team, and we had a talk. The interview only lasted half an hour, but we spoke before and after the interview, and was able to ask a lot of questions off the record. And one of the things they kept saying is that they can't talk about individual cases. So the recording we're going to play shortly is we're just going to cover the basic information to get people to understand how this works, the reimbursements for the NDIA supports that people receive through personal injury compensation. I'll get Chris to play that now, and if there's any questions in chat, we'll just pause it, and if I can answer those questions, I will. And anybody wants to come up onto the panel and talk about it, you're more than welcome. It's only half an hour, this interview. They do most of the talking. I had to send my questions through prior to the interview so they could make sure they had the answers to the questions that I wanted to ask. But I did want to get them onto a live stream so you, the viewers, could ask questions in chat or come up onto the panel and talk to them directly. They were very reluctant to do this because they didn't want to talk about personal cases, individual cases, which is understandable. And the only way they would do it is to do a recorded interview and get it approved through the NDIS. And that took 2 or 3 weeks, that whole process. So I'll just get Chris to play that recorded interview, and if anyone has any questions in chat, I'll just pause it and I'll answer if I can. If you can just play that, please, Chris.
So, hi, Jeff. Just welcome to the conversation. Just before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the countries on which we meet. So I'm coming to you from Wathaurong country. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to also pass on that respect and acknowledgement to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today. So this morning, we're just going to provide an overview of the compensation function of the NDIA, and then clarify any points that we may need to. So I guess in starting, I think it's important to recognise that the NDIS is designed to complement, not replace, existing compensation arrangements for personal injury. So what that means is we have an objective to ensure no duplicate funding for supports through recovering past NDIS amounts and or applying what's called a compensation reduction amount to a participant's statement of supports. The relevant section of the NDIS Act that we're talking about is Chapter 5, as well as the NDIS supports for participants, accounting for compensation rules.
Okay, can you just clarify for people who are watching the compensation reduction, the CRA?
Yeah, so the compensation reduction amount it's a couple of important points when it comes to the CRA is the fact that it's not a debt, it's not an amount that we take as a lump sum, but rather when a participant receives compensation for future care and supports, the expectation is that money would be used towards their future care and support. So the CRA is it within the rules, those compensation rules, and the rules set out a process that the agency goes through in calculating the compensation reduction amount. In essence, it will identify the proportion of compensation that the participant did receive for future care and supports, and that is available for them to contribute towards their own care and support needs. The process is that we'll do the calculation. We provide an estimate to the participant. There's then the opportunity for the participant to seek clarity, provide additional information. We also work with the participants' stakeholders, so whether that's a trustee or a lawyer, we gather the information, we determine what the total CRA will be, and then we do what's called an amortized rate of that CRA, which basically is the amount of compensation that will, or the amount of CRA that will apply to each plan. So that results in the plan funding for the participant being reduced by the value of that CRA until the CRA is completely exhausted. So we don't take that money back in a lump sum, but rather we reduce the participant's plan funding until the CRA is completely been exhausted.
So can you clarify with the CRA, is that from the date of the accident or the date of the compensation payout?
No, so it's from the date of the compensation payout, because we can't do it from the date of accident or before the compensation has been paid, because the starting position is how much compensation the participant actually received.
Right, so I just want to make it quite plain. So if a person receives support from the NDIA while they're going through the court process, is those supports taken into the CRA?
No, into the CRA, they would come into the recovery. So it's easy to think about it. There's kind of two elements. If I step through it from a timeline perspective, where a participant has an accident, they may already be an NDIS participant, or they become an NDIS participant after the accident. They then pursue compensation through litigation. At the point that they receive compensation, there's two possible avenues. One is the recovery, which looks at the past, so prior to the compensation being awarded, and then the future. The past is the recoverable element. So the NDIA would look at and say, how much has the NDIA funded towards the person's care and support needs related to their compensable impairment, and then recover from their compensation payment that amount. And then the CRA looks at how we'll account for the compensation received for future care and supports into the future.
Okay.
So from the recovery perspective, as I said, it looks at and says if a participant, it's probably important to highlight that in order for the NDIA to consider a compensation payment, there's a few criteria that need to be met. And those are relatively straightforward in that it needs to be a lump sum or a periodic payment. It needs to be for a personal injury, and it needs to include an amount, either wholly or partly, that covers the cost of supports that may be funded or provided by the NDIS. So what that essentially means is the participant's claim for compensation, or the compensation awarded, has to include an amount for future care and supports.
Okay. Yep.
So once those criteria have been met, it's at that point in time that we'll evaluate the compensation on either, depending upon when they became a participant. As I said before, the recoverable amount is the amount of supports and services that the NDIA has paid, or the NDIS has paid, for the compensable impairment from the date of impairment to the day before compensation is fixed.
Okay.
And then the process is that we would issue, in most instances, a recovery notice to the defendant insurer and seek payment directly from them. and then the compensation would be paid out to the participant.
Yep.
Sorry, Jeff.
No, you're right. Just going to say that it's only for supports. It doesn't cover like the loss of income and stuff like that. It's only for the supports that the NDIA provide. Is that right?
Correct. That's right. Yep. So the recovery is reasonably straightforward in that we tend to be able to work with the participant and their solicitors who are representing them, and have that move through. It's similar to what happens with other agencies such as Centrelink, Medicare, Work Cover, those kinds of things. So once the recovery is finalised, we'll then work with the participant on calculating the compensation reduction amount. One of the really important elements of the compensation reduction amount, I think it's important that participants understand, is in calculating the CRA, we can take into consideration any supports that a participant has paid from the date of impairment to the day before they became a participant. So if they've needed to contribute towards their own care and supports prior to becoming a participant, we can take that into consideration and deduct it from the compensation reduction amount.
Right.
And that's part of the calculation that we perform. It's once that's finalised, as I said before, we'll then determine what the total CRA figure is, and then work out how that will be amortised on a per annum basis. So what amount will be deducted from the participant's plan at each review.
Yep, that's quite plain, clear. Yep, that's very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And I think it's important to also highlight a couple of points that the agency is really has demonstrated, I guess, that preparedness to work really closely with participants to ensure that the processes are working, that they understand what we're doing. That's certainly been the case in the compensation branch. We're acutely aware that there is a level of complexity to this, so we make every effort to ensure that we're constantly working with participants and their nominees or various stakeholders to ensure that they understand why we're doing what we're doing, how we're going to do it, what information we need, as well as providing support and clarifying points so that it is really clear. And we also are really interested in making sure that what we do, what communication we provide, meets their needs. So we're regularly seeking feedback. We work with representative groups to evaluate our various communication tools to seek feedback and improve the way in which we do what we do. Okay.
And can you just clarify for people who may have an ABI or a cognitive impairment, that all that will be in plain English, and does the NDIA get an independent advocacy organisation to help with that?
So we do certainly do an assessment of any of the material that we produce to ensure that it is as simple as it possibly can be. And as I said before, we do engage with a range of different audiences to ensure that anything that we develop is able to be understood. But in saying that, we also do work really closely with participants and their nominees, whether that be a support worker, their a parent, guardian, lawyer, whatever it might be, to ensure that if there's not good understanding by the participant, that we have got other people that can help explain it, to make sure that there is a good level of understanding about what it is that we're going to do. It is a really important point, something that we're really very conscious of, making sure that the participant themselves is aware of what is happening and that their questions are answered.
Yeah, it's very important that happens for especially for people with an acquired brain injury. Sometimes they struggle to understand what's going on around them, especially after a severe accident. So that's good. Yep.
Yeah. The other, probably the other area worth mentioning, Jeff, that we haven't necessarily touched on is in relation to participants that might also be mutual participant of Commonwealth or state and territory statutory schemes, such as, in Victoria, it's the Transport Accident Commission, and in other states, they have other lifetime care schemes. Because although those supports and services, those schemes may not meet the definition of compensation, our team does also work with participants who are mutual participants of those other schemes, and the process for that is that we would identify what supports and services a participant can get from those other schemes, and then adjust their NDIS plan to account for those supports and services. Again, we do work really closely with participants to ensure that they have and are engaged with that other scheme. Where not, we support them to develop that engagement. We also then do interact with the schemes themselves to ensure that the participant is receiving all of the supports that they are entitled to under the various pieces of legislation, whether it be under the relevant Statutory Schemes Act or the NDIS Act, and that it's really clear on who's going to fund what, and particularly making it really clear to the participant so that they know who they go to for what supports and services.
Okay.
I guess the only other point that that we were going to touch on was that there is often in this area in relation to compensation lots of legal jargon, and that there is lots of information that we would request as part of our process. But in saying that, we were able to work with the participant on who the most appropriate person is to provide that information. So often it will be us interacting with their lawyers or their trustees, or the participant themselves, to get all of the information so that the decisions that we make are the preferable decision. I think it's also important to point out that any decision that's made, like other decisions under the NDIS, are able to be appealed and merit tested at the AAT. But importantly, I guess what we're focused on is getting the decision right the first time. So I would encourage any of your listeners that if they have any questions in relation to compensation or need clarity on any of the things that we've spoken about today, or if they're going through that compensation pathway themselves, that they reach out to the NDIA and in particular the compensation team, and we will make contact with them and clarify anything that needs to be clarified. And that if they have any specific questions relating to their matter, that they don't hesitate to reach out. And if they need any support or help from us, then that's certainly something that we can look at as well.
So a participant can just call the general NDIS number and ask for the compensation team.
That's right.
Yep.
And then the NCC will send through that request to us. There's also a lot of information on the NDIS website. There's the operational guidelines, but there's also some compensation fact sheets. There's also a section in relation to compensation and your plan. As I said before, we're regularly reviewing that content to make sure that it's as plain English as possible. And if people have feedback or there's things that they don't understand, then they can reach out. There's also on that page the ways in which participants can make contact with us.
Okay. I went through the compensation on the website, and I did find it really difficult to understand in certain parts because I personally thought it was a bit contradictory, especially at the beginning of the overview. Can you just clarify? I mean, we spoke about this before. I just want you to clarify. Under what circumstances? I think you might have already done it, but for prospective clients of the NDIS.
Yep. So when you mean prospective client, so basically what that means is the prospective client is someone who may be going through the access pathway, but essentially hasn't yet been granted access to the NDIS. What that means is, in relation to compensation, is that if a participant receives compensation even prior to becoming a participant, then that compensation can still be considered under the NDIS Act. It would mean then that it's unlikely that there'd be a recovery, because we can only recover up until the point in time that a participant receives their compensation. And if they receive their compensation prior to being granted access, then there would be no recoverable amount. But it does mean then that we would take it into consideration when looking at applying a CRA, particularly, as I said, if the participant has received an amount of funding for future care and supports, then it's still expected that they would use that compensation for that purpose, and that's why we would apply the CRA.
Okay, and can you clarify how often this is the compensation is the rules and that are reviewed?
So, I mean, the Act and the rules are reviewed as required in some respects. There is a requirement to review the rules, and I believe that will happen at a not too distant point in the future. I think that it's important to recognise that there's the NDIS review that's underway, and that may also have some recommendations in relation to the Act and the rules. I mean, my understanding is that the Act can be reviewed, or recommendations to review the Act can be made to the relevant minister or member of Parliament, and then it may be introduced into Parliament. But I don't know that if there's a specific time frame that needs to be done.
Okay. Yeah, because on the website, I mean, it was 2013.
Yes. And there'll be amendments, I think, made along the way. I don't know if there's a requirement. It's probably not my area of expertise in relation to having a full rewrite or anything like that. But amendments can be made as required.
So can you clarify, when you say you work closely with organisations, does that include the NDIA board and the IAC and any other?
So definitely, yeah. So we've definitely met with the IAC on a number of occasions, so the Independent Advisory Council, as well as going out to other participants that have gone through the compensation pathway. So we do meet with the IAC when we're looking at, some of our operations and some of our literature and those kinds of things, and get their feedback, and importantly, get their perspective of, what we need to be considerate of. And then dealing with participants that have gone through the pathway, we do certainly test, how effective our communication was, whether there was anything else they would have liked to have seen from our team in supporting them through this, that and what their experience was like. With the board, well, we regularly update the board if and when required. But so the board is certainly consulted, as well as our senior leadership team.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything else.
I think the final point is, Jeff, as we spoke about before, is that there is a level of complexity to it. I would, as I said before, encourage anyone who's got a question, if they're not understanding something or they're unsure, that they do reach out and ask. We're here to help. We're here to make sure that people do understand what's happening, how things will work, and yeah, answer any questions that they might have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important that the compensation team, it's very accessible.
Yeah, okay.
It's like I said, we chatted before. I was shocked on some of the stuff I read on the website, and that's why I reached out for clarification, because I wasn't sure. I haven't got a college degree. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I just wasn't sure on some of the meanings in the overview that's put on the website.
Yeah, and that's good feedback. We are looking, as I said before, we will regularly review the information that we do publish. So that's something that we'll certainly take on board and go back and have a look and see where there's an opportunity for us to make things clearer.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think that probably covers the basics. Like you said, it's people's individual cases can be very complex, and this is just a basic information to let people know that there is a compensation team.
Yep.
And that you're accessible, and you can help as much as you can.
Yeah.
But I did want to clarify too, with the Act and everything. Are there any parts of the Act directed towards lawyers to ensure that they consult with the NDIA?
Not specifically under our Act, because when a person brings a compensation claim, it's not brought under the NDIS Act. It'll be brought under a different Act. But in saying that, one of the things that we have done and will continue to do is looking at how we engage with the broader legal system, whether that's building their understanding of the relevant compensation elements of the NDIS Act, as well as identifying ways in which we either can educate them or support them in the work that they do. But there isn't anything specific that comes under the NDIS Act.
Because I think, especially for professional people like lawyers, that it should be compulsory for them to explain to their clients, the requirements, the possible requirements, and impact from the NDIA that any compensation claim has. Because I know there's been that sort of missed by some lawyers that haven't provided their client with relevant information, up-to-date information on how this could impact their NDIS funding.
Yeah, it's probably not something I can necessarily have an opinion on or provide any advice on, other than, as I said before, we do regularly engage with individual lawyers and law associations, have done in the past, and will continue to do that into the future. So yeah, it's not probably my place to say what they should or shouldn't do, other than talk about what we try and do to make sure that they are educated and aware of the NDIS Act and the relevant provisions as they relate to compensation.
Yeah, I mean sorry, that was my personal opinion.
Yeah.
That should be compulsory part of the Act. That the lawyers should be informing their clients, of the possible impact of supports from the NDIS. Because there has been a few cases, I've seen them on TV, but yeah, that's not the NDIA's fault. I think it's the lawyer's fault. But yeah, my personal opinion is that should be compulsory for lawyers.
Yeah, I would say that we do get more and more contact from lawyers proactively, in relation to seeking out whether or not the NDIS has any interest in a matter that they may be working on. But yeah.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, I think that sort of covers most of what I put forward to the questions I sent forward to you earlier. I think we've covered all those points. That's one thing that I did want to clarify, and you did touch on it before the recording, was how many times has the NDIA stepped in to ensure that someone's compensation is appropriate?
So we haven't. So I think you're talking about those sections of the Act that would enable the NDIA to either take over conduct of an existing claim or bring a claim in the name of the participant. To date, we haven't had to do that. So the experience and that I've seen is, participants are pursuing all of their entitlements under the relevant legislation in which their compensation claim has been brought. As I said before, there are instances where a lawyer may reach out and have a clarifying discussion with us and those kinds of things, but we've never had to date, step in and take over a claim or bring a claim or anything like that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Certainly not something that we're interested in doing. I think it's giving the participant, sorry, not that we're not interested in, our preference would be that a participant works with their lawyer to seek their maximum entitlement. And that, we don't see that we necessarily need to have a role where we don't need to have a role.
And can you also clarify what percentage of NDIS participants go through compensation?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's around sort of that between sort of 4 and 6% of participants have received or in the process of pursuing compensation that would then come into our team and that we work with. Okay.
All right. I think that sort of covers it all. I appreciate your time for that. That was really good. Very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having us. And as I said, if people have any questions or participants have any questions, please don't hesitate to make contact.
Just ring that normal NDIS contact number and they can put you through.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
They'll send us a message and we'll inevitably call people back.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. You can sort of end that recording now if you like.
Awesome. I was just going to say.
Okay. So I hope that was quite clear. So I'm going to try and summarise to my best ability. If somebody sues for personal injury and they go on the NDIA straight away, and it takes 4 or 5 years for it to go through the court system, and once a compensation has been agreed upon, then the NDIA can go in and recover the costs of supports they've already provided from the date of entry onto the NDIS to the date of receiving the compensation. They can also forecast, so for an example, if a 24-year-old gets hit by a car and they end up a quadriplegic, then they calculate how much supports that person will have over the next 50 years, so to the age of 74, which is the average age. And if that's $50,000 a year, then it's like $2.5 million a year, $2.5 million over the next 50 years that go into the supports that the NDIA can then reclaim with the CRA. Which when I first heard about it, I sort of a bit opposed to it. But once you think about it, when you receive personal injury compensation, you get money for supports for the rest of your life. You get money for compensated for the loss of income and for the personal injury. So if somebody gets hurt at the age of 24 and they go through to the age of 67 before they retire, then their loss of income is like $2.1 million. So they get reimbursed for that. So that's that part of the compensation is not touched. The income, the loss of income, and the personal injury is not touched. It's only for the future and past supports that the NDIA will either get as a lump sum or as in installments, as indicated by the compensation. The overview that Christian was talking about on the compensation team's website, I think 1.1 it says they respect the rights of people, individual rights of people. Then a couple of paragraphs down it says under the legislation in 2013, we have the right to force someone to take a course of action to regain compensation, or they can take over a claim for someone who has received a significant injury. I don't agree with it. That's Big Brother stepping in, and I know they have the right to retrieve any supports, financial supports that you get through compensation, but forcing someone to do it when they're not in the frame of mind, they might be going through depression, they might some sort of mental illness. Forcing someone to go through it, in my opinion, is inappropriate. It's not fair. But for the NDIS to get reimbursed for the supports, I do agree with. I mean, that's what the compensation is for, supports for the rest of your life. So, and that's what they're claiming back. And there's one question I did ask after that recording finished was, if somebody has a personal injury and they get supports for the next 30 years and the NDIA calculate how much the supports are, so it's $50,000 a year, but after 5 years they progressively get worse, so they need more supports. They then can't come in for the NDIA can't come in for a second bite of the apple. They can only do it once. That's why it's indexed to the CPI for the duration of the compensation. But they can't, if you get worse, they can't come back and have another go. So they're limited to what the payout is. The reason I reached out is because there's a lot of confusion. I've seen a few people on TV one person who broke their neck went through a lawyer who, if they don't win the case, you don't pay your fee, but if they do win the case, they could take up to 50% of the compensation payout. And this person had to pay back, pay the NDIA like $900 and something thousand for past and future supports, and they lost 50% of the compensation claim to the lawyer's fees, and that didn't leave them all that much after the NDIA took their bite out of it. That's why I strongly believe that the NDIA should force lawyers to get the clients to contact the NDIA compensation team, or the lawyers on behalf of their clients contact the NDIA compensation team, because some lawyers will just grab their money and run and just leave it and not do the right thing, and that leaves the person who seeks compensation shortchanged in the long term, which I think is unfair, and that's my personal opinion. I chatted with the Christian and Kim for 2 hours, and the recording goes for about half an hour, but we had a lot of talk before and after the recordings, and I found Christian and Kim very open and receptive to my questions. I wanted them to come onto a live stream so people could ask them questions directly without having to record it, but they said they wouldn't do it because of privacy reasons, which I really don't agree with. If they can't answer a question, all they have to say is, I can't answer that question. It's a personal privacy thing. Contact us after the live stream, but they would only do it through a recording, which I had to get approved, and then once it was approved, I was able to put it up on the channel. And I can only have this up on the channel for 12 months, and I have to take it down because it's been reviewed. Things change once every 12 months, so I have to take it down after 12 months. Today's recording, but I hope this was informative. I don't know if there's any people in chat who wants to ask a question or... Okay, all right. Today's recording, that just covers the very basics. So if you're going through compensation or you know somebody's going through compensation, get them to contact the compensation team through the NDIS number. It's going to save you a lot of heartache in the long term. Do it right. Do it once, do it right. All right, we might just leave it there. I hope that was informative. I'd like to get some feedback on what people thought of the interview. And if there's any other topics you want me to talk about or cover, send me an email at blindadvocate007@gmail.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that notifications bell, so every time I put up a video, you'll get notified, and you can share this with as many people as you want. All right, we might end it there, Chris. Thanks. Okay, thanks everyone.